Naturally, though, it was enjoyable on the set. She was one of the world's biggest child stars, and I had both grown up in it. Award-winning, bankable, and trusted to carry entire films before she was old enough to vote, she was a Disney phenomenon. But behind the scenes, her life was falling apart, even as the cameras caught her grinning and receiving standing ovations. She was dealing with health issues she never discussed, carrying a lot of weight in quiet, and entering a financial crisis that almost destroyed everything she had worked so hard to achieve. Nobody had warned her of these repercussions. Furthermore, the harm was already done when the facts came to light. The external public image of Hayley Mills. Hayley Mills appeared to have figured out life at a very young age. She grinned effortlessly. She spoke with assurance. Hayley Mills was more than merely successful to the general public. Within a career that functioned flawlessly, she appeared content, safe, and secure. However, that polished and comforting image only revealed a portion of the narrative. A life that was moving far more quickly than the person living it was behind it. Rose Hayley Catherine. On April 18, 1946, music, Vivian Mills was born in Marylebone, London. She was raised in a home where pursuing an artistic career was not valued. It was the language of everyday existence. John Mills, her father, was already a highly regarded actor in Britain. Mary Hayley Bell, her mother, wrote plays and novels. Discussions about scripts, rehearsals, and creative arguments were common at home. Music, writers and actors frequently went through. The entire family was affected by that world, not just Hayley. Juliet Mills, her younger sister, would go on to pursue a career in acting. On British television, her aunt, music, Annette Mills, was well known. Later on, Susie Blake, her cousin, took the same route. For this family, fame was nothing new. It was a feature of the terrain. The early arrival of Hayley, music, and its total takeover were what made it unique. She studied at the Elmhurst Ballet School, which placed a high value on performance and discipline. She received precise training in movement, listening, and response. Her eventual on-screen persona was influenced by that training. She seemed calm and vigilant even as a little toddler. Directors were aware of that. J. Lee Thompson was one of them. Almost by accident, Thompson saw Hayley in 1958 when he was at the Mills family home. She wasn't acting. Music, she was just there. However, there was something distinctive about her. Her ease, her ability to focus, and her natural capacity for sustained attention. In Tiger Bay, Thompson positioned her across from her father. Everything was altered by the movie. She gave a really amazing performance. Critics reacted right away. She emerged as a fresh figure to watch in British cinema after winning the BAFTA Award for Most Promising Newcomer. It appeared to be the ideal start from the perspective of the general public. Early talent detection, parental guidance, and appreciation are all part of the process. Music, after that, Hollywood called. Hayley featured in Walt Disney Productions' Pollyanna in 1960. She became a global celebrity almost immediately after the role. Warmth, optimism, and emotional authenticity were evident to the audience. Disney recognized dependability and widespread popularity. She received an Academy Juvenile Award from the Academy Awards, a unique honor that made her one of the most well-known young actors of her time. She won the Golden Globe's New Star of the Year award the following year. Her reputation was solidified by that point. She was the intelligent, talented young actress who could easily carry a movie. The part became meaningful when she portrayed twins in The Parent Trap. The same female in two different guises. Perfect execution, perfect timing. The notion that Hayley Mills could be all things at once was adored by the public. Disney repeatedly cast her in search of the castaways over the course of the following few years, including That Darn Cat, The Moon Spinners, and Summer Magic, music. Every movie reaffirmed the same point. Hayley Mills was trustworthy, music, upbeat, and trouble-free. One of the world's most famous young celebrities. And they clung to that interpretation. The public was unaware of how constrained that image had grown and the pressure it put on a child growing up in it. Her private, music, life was tightly hidden, but her profession continued unabated. The success continued. The gap between Hayley's appearance and her true self continued to grow, yet the smile never wavered. Hayley Mills's personal difficulties. The public believed that Hayley Mills was shielded by her success for many years. Her career appeared to be well managed, fame arrived early, and accolades followed swiftly. In private, however, the very structure that brought her fame also confined her. A large portion of her life had already been predetermined by the time she was old enough to comprehend what was going on. At the age of 12, Hayley Mills became well known throughout the world because to Tiger Bay and Pollyanna. Her face quickly became recognizable to viewers in both America and Britain. She soon committed to 6 major motion pictures when she signed a long-term contract with Walt Disney Productions. There was no way to question the deal at that age. It offered prestige, exposure, and stability. What it also brought was relentless expectation, hard music. Hayley wasn't merely cast by Disney. They molded her persona. She was portrayed as gentle, naive, and incredibly upbeat. She was always followed by that picture. Interviews confirmed it. It was replicated in movie roles. Appearances in public required it. Hayley was still supposed to look the same as she approached adolescence. No mistakes, no public uncertainty, and no obvious growth difficulties. If at all, normal adolescence had to occur in silence. It wasn't just outside pressure. She was often likened to her father, John Mills, whose work was well respected in the profession. Music critics kept a tight eye on her to see if she lived up to expectations. Another element of subtle contrast was that her sister Juliet Mills was also working music steadily. Hayley knew everything. Every performance seemed to be a test of legacy as well as skill. She was also losing opportunities behind the scenes. At the height of her Disney career, she was being considered for more adventurous projects, including as adaptations of contentious books like Lolita. She may have easily transitioned into more nuanced personalities in these roles. However, that was impossible due to Disney's monopoly over her image. It was more important to preserve the music brand than to let her develop. At the time, the choices weren't presented as losses. Only later would they feel that way. The fissures started to show by the middle of the 1960s. Hayley made an effort to transition into adult roles, most notably in 1966 with The Family Way. Although the movie was supposed to be a sign of maturity, opinions were divided. Many viewers were uncomfortable with the shift rather than embracing it. For some music audiences, the contrast between the film's subjects and her long-standing Disney image was too stark. The position did not lead to opportunities. Expectations were muddled. Music. She carried that uncertainty into the late 1960s. Offers for films decreased. She was difficult for casting directors to place. For a lot of people in Hollywood, music, she remained the youngster they had known, stuck in the past. Adult responsibilities went elsewhere. She wasn't regarded as flexible, but she wasn't regarded as risky either. It was more difficult to overcome that reluctance than open rejection. Her career as a movie star had considerably stalled by the 1970s. Studios rapidly moved on from her since she was no longer a box office guarantee. It appeared to be a natural fade from the outside. From the inside, it was like being abandoned by a sector of the economy that had before rushed to seize her. Hayley, music, changed instead of vanishing. She looked to the stage, where people were more willing to accept her for who she was today rather than who she had been. She starred in a West End production of Peter, Music, Pan in 1969. The theater provided space, something that films no longer could. No close-ups were locked to a picture of a child. Every performance was independent. Then came television. Through series appearances and guest roles, British TV provided her with consistent employment. It moved more slowly. There were varied expectations. She was able to work without letting any one version of herself define her. It was stability and control rather than a comeback to superstardom. Hayley decided to share her tale herself years later. She candidly discussed the emotional toll of early celebrity and the drawn-out process of recovering her identity in her 2021 book Forever Young. It was not a story of resentment. It was a chronicle of perseverance and learning to live past an image that had previously seemed unavoidable. Then, suddenly, Hollywood was back. She starred in Mike Shyamalan's 2024 film Trap. It wasn't a nostalgic role. It was independent of her history. It merely acknowledged her existence on her terms, decades later. By that time, Hayley Mills had persevered through renaissance, loss of momentum, and fame. Few people were aware that one of her most unstable periods had nothing to do with her reputation or job. It had to do with money and a financial meltdown that all of her hard-earned money was all but gone. The economic downturn that rocked her. It was clear to the majority of onlookers that Hayley Mills would never have to worry about money. As a child, she worked nonstop, hauled big-budget films, and spent years in the epicenter of Disney's success around the world. Such fame was meant to bring security for the rest of one's life. However, the reality was completely different from the narrative that many had anticipated when the numbers were finally presented to her. Hayley Mills made what many would later refer to as a small fortune by the middle of the 1960s. According to industry estimates, she made tens of millions of dollars during the Disney era. Movies like That Darn Cat, The Parent Trap, and Pollyanna weren't small hits. They were highly popular at the box office, aired on television, disseminated globally, and associated with long-term merchandising. She had been working steadily since she was a little girl and had starred in over a dozen films by the time she was in her early 20s. Her pay was not given to her immediately, as was the case with many child actresses of that time. A large portion of it was put in a trust fund designed to safeguard her income until she was an adult. It made sense on paper. The money was managed by adults. The money was put aside. There was no reason to believe that the result, music, would be anything but safe. Hayley persisted in her efforts, assuming that the monetary compensation for all those years of self-control and publicity would come later. She didn't completely comprehend how Britain's tax, music, system operated at the time. The UK had some of the highest income tax rates in the world in the 1960s and 1970s. The marginal rate was as high as 91% for high earners. Many actors, musicians, and artists were impacted by these laws, which were hotly contested. However, the repercussions were particularly dire for someone like Hayley, who had earned the majority of her income while still legally a minor. The moment that should have felt secure transformed into astonishment when she eventually had access to music in her trust fund. She thought the money had been safely stored, but it was mostly gone. The vast majority of it had gone to taxes. Financial security had not materialized despite years of labor, public recognition, music, and pressure. She later called the realization devastating in her memoir, Forever Young. The loss itself wasn't the only issue. It was the knowledge that there would never be another opportunity to make that much money. Both practical and emotional effects were felt right away. Hayley needed to adapt fast. The way of life that people thought she led was no longer feasible. There was no secret safety net, no silent reserve, music, to rely on. She had to lead a humble life and pursue a steady career in music despite her reputation in order to keep things stable. Television and theater were no longer the only creative alternatives. They became necessity. The emotional impact was more profound. She had grown up fulfilling expectations that she had not established for herself. She had borne adult responsibilities too early, missed everyday events, and kept up a public persona for music that never quite aligned with her inner life. It felt like the system, music, itself had betrayed us, not any one person, to find out that those sacrifices had not led to long-term security. Nothing unlawful had occurred. Even though nothing had been taken, the result seemed essentially unfair. Hayley made sensible decisions because she lacked the financial independence that many of her contemporaries believed she possessed. She concentrated on work that was accessible, dependable, and fulfilling. Acting on stage became crucial. There was uniformity in British television. Music, later, she used writing as a means of processing and articulating her experiences. Hollywood glitz had lost much of its charm. It had previously promised permanence and let it down. Her priorities changed as a result of the loss. Income and visibility were no longer used as indicators of success. Control was used to measure it. The financial collapse produced a kind of clarity that celebrity never had by allowing people to choose ideas without music pressure and to establish a life independent of public approbation. Her experience turned into a cautionary tale that was frequently brought up whenever the topic of child actors and money came up again. It demonstrated how early success may disappear in the absence of adequate protection and how policy and bad timing could cause even huge profits to evaporate. Hayley did not openly advocate for herself or portray herself as a victim. She just spoke the truth about what had happened, and she rebuilt gradually and cautiously according to her own plans. However, financial loss was just one of her life's destabilizing factors. Her relationships were another area that was far less stable away from the spotlight. Unfortunately, the romantic life she attempted to conceal would turn out to be as intricate, agonizing, and illuminating as all that had come before. Hayley Mills's tumultuous romantic life. Hayley Mills was no longer the well-guarded Disney kid that the public had recalled by the early 1970s. As an adult, she was living on her own, working diligently, and attempting to create a personal life apart from the stereotype that had surrounded her from infancy. However, the first significant relationship she committed to would bring just as much instability as it did imbalance. It was at work that Hayley Mills met Roy Bolting. Bolting, one of the well-known Bolting brothers, was a well-respected personality in British cinema whose films frequently combine scathing humor with social commentary. He was well established in the music industry by the time their paths intersected. After years of being viewed as a kid star, Hayley was still working to re-establish herself in the music industry. The Family Way, the project that symbolized Hayley's attempt to transition into adult responsibilities, was the foundation of their relationship. Bolting was the film's director. Two persons at very different stages of life who were working towards a similar, creatively relevant goal were brought together by the set. He stood for seriousness, expertise, and authority to Hayley. For Bolting, she stood for youth, skill, and a sort of rebirth. In 1971, they were married. Hayley was 25. Roy Bolting was 57. The media noticed the 32-year age difference right away. Some viewed it as smart but out of the ordinary. Others were skeptical of it. Music, Hayley did not explain or justify the relationship in public. She had no desire to defend her personal decisions to a crowd that had witnessed the development of her music at that time in her life. Her everyday existence was drastically altered by the marriage. Bolting was at ease among more established friendships, routines, music, and habits that had been formed long before Hayley was involved. After the abrupt loss of her professional momentum and financial, music, security, she was still getting used to maturity and finding her footing. In practice, things that appeared steady on the outside frequently felt uneven. Crispian Mills, their son, was born in 1973. Fame never grounded Hayley like motherhood did. It offered responsibility and concentration that felt genuine and personal. As the lead singer of Kula Shaker, Crispian would go on to forge a public persona that was far different from his mother's Disney heritage. However, the marriage itself found it difficult to adapt to the changes in music. Once tolerable, the age gap grew more noticeable over time. It was difficult for their lifestyles to coincide. Hayley continued to labor, rebuild, and change. Bolting's fate was predetermined. He believed that decisions that were important to her were settled or unimportant. The relationship terminated in 1977. There were no public charges or scandals surrounding the divorce. It was silent yet decisive. For Hayley, it signaled the end of a chapter characterized by imbalance, by attempting to develop alongside someone whose life had already taken on a fixed form. The marriage had an impact. It showed her how quickly admiration might become distance and how readily security could feel like constraint. Above all, it demonstrated to her that emotional security was just as vital as surviving professionally. Those were lessons she would apply to her future relationship. However, this subsequent one would turn out to be equally significant and far more stormy than anyone had anticipated. Following the dissolution of her marriage to Roy Bolting, Hayley Mills started a whole new type of relationship that was more influenced by uncertainty than hierarchy. Lee Lawson, a British actor and director who works on theatre and cinema, was the guy at its core. Lawson was still developing his career and was closer to Hayley in age than Bolting. During a time when both were managing change rather than stability, their relationship developed. Near the conclusion of her marriage to Bolting, in the mid-1970s, Hayley Mills and Lawson fell in love. The connection was complicated just because of the timing. Without much delay, Hayley was transitioning from one lengthy chapter, song, to the next. This connection developed mostly behind closed doors, in contrast to her previous marriage. They took their time getting married. Rather, for almost 10 years, they coexisted peacefully. Instead of being a public statement, it was a domestic partnership. Hayley was striving to establish a sense of normalcy that celebrity had never given her while also raising her son and working professionally in television and theater. Jason Lawson, her second son, was born at this time. Once more, motherhood took the stage in her life. However, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, she was outside of the expectations that many people still had because this time it arrived without the official framework of marriage and music. She kept her decision-making private. She just, music, coexisted with them. Although they weren't always in sync, Hayley and Lawson were both working professionally. Their careers took various paths and progressed at different rates. Just as much as interest influenced Hayley's writing. She required stable jobs. Television and the theater provided that. Lawson, on the other hand, sought possibilities that weren't always consistent with his family's schedule or his financial security. Eventually, it was more difficult to overlook the distinctions. They were drawn apart by the pressures of their jobs, their children, and their own aspirations. What had been encouraging started to seem tense. There were no pivotal moments in the public eye, no one incident that signaled the end. Rather, misaligned priorities caused the relationship to progressively deteriorate. Hayley's relationship terminated in 1984. Another silent turning point was the divide. As a single mother of two, she was suddenly in charge of both her own and her kids' stability. She was forced to rely entirely on herself once more after the relationship ended, both practically and emotionally. Independence took the place of whatever solace the partnership had previously provided, if she desired it or not. And Hayley Mills started living the most misunderstood chapter of her life, one that went mostly unnoticed for decades. During this time of raising kids, working quietly, and avoiding the spotlight, Hayley Mills' life had slowed down in ways that the general public hardly noticed by the time she met Fergus Bomji. She had long since moved past the intensity of her early fame. Her perspective on the world had already been altered by the financial setback, the uncertainty surrounding her work, and the dissolution of past relationships. Right now, she was searching for stability rather than rescue or reinvention. Through theater circles, Hayley Mills got to know Bombi in the 1990s. The same setting that had kept her going when Hollywood lost interest. Her career has become reliant on theater. It provided community, continuity, and purpose. There, their bond was forged via common effort and rhythm rather than fame or professional advantages. Indian-born American actor Bomji was well known for both his theater and cinema appearances. He navigated the industry without wearing spectacles. He wasn't defined by his fame, nor was he pursuing it. That was enough to distinguish him from the characters Hayley had been drawn to in her early years. There was no formal hierarchy between them, no disparity influenced by wealth, notoriety, or age-based authority. But there was a big age difference. 20 years separated Hayley and me. That distinction might have drawn notice or conjecture in previous decades. Hayley stopped making the sounds around the late 1990s. She didn't openly defend or explain the relationship. She lived it in silence. In 1997, they became partners. In contrast to her past relationships, this one developed slowly. There was no pressure to fit into a narrative, no public statement, and no rush towards marriage. Instead of discussing headlines, they talked about everyday life. They spoke, worked, and spent time together, clears throat. That was sufficient. They didn't have kids together. Hayley had already established her life as a mother by that point. Her boys were maturing. Her attention was no longer on expansion but on equilibrium. Rather than changing her life, her connection with Bamji fit into it. The most notable aspect of music, this collaboration, was how long it lasted. This connection held consistent despite the fact that a large portion of Hayley's previous life had been characterized by unexpected changes such as sudden celebrity, sudden financial loss, and sudden profession switches. Without innovation or collapse, it silently persevered year after year. That constancy was important. One factor was their mutual interest in art. The intimacy and discipline of theater were treasured by both. Both were aware of the pressure to perform well without requiring approval from large crowds. That way of thinking was reflected in their way of life. It was less showy, calmer, and more intimate. As time went on, the relationship ceased to be the center of attention in Hayley's life. And maybe that was the idea. She found a partnership that didn't need an explanation after decades of being observed, classified, and misinterpreted. Hayley Mills was able to completely embrace a part of herself that had been postponed for decades and that the public would only realize much later during these more subdued years, away from the spotlight. Double life, Hayley Mills. The public image of Hayley Mills seemed stable and finished for decades. She was a regular worker. She continued to be visible. Her words were deliberate. There was nothing about her that suggested anarchy or collapse, music. Most people were unaware that this seeming stability, music, coexisted with a personal struggle she made a concerted effort to conceal. She later admitted that she battled bulimia in her younger years in her memoir, Forever Young. She didn't talk about it at the time, and nobody in her immediate vicinity took notice of it in public. She, music, appeared fit, energetic, and in charge from the outside. On the inside, she was attempting to control expectations that she had learned to fulfill before realizing the price. She did not present the matter as an act of defiance or attention-seeking. Music was a secret coping strategy that had been molded by years of comparison, evaluation, and surveillance. Like her career, her body had become something she felt needed ongoing attention. The battle remained hidden, neatly folded under the childlike professionalism she had learnt. Another health problem arose years later. It was difficult to hide from herself this time. Hayley had a breast cancer diagnosis in 2008. While in New York on her birthday, she received the news. The situation seemed weird just because of the timing. Fear and joy met in one breath. Soon after, she started chemotherapy, as was customary in medicine. However, the music negative effects proved too much to handle after 3 sessions. She believed that the physical exhaustion caused by the treatment was unsustainable. She decided to forego chemotherapy in favor of surgery and integrative therapies while being closely monitored by a physician. The procedure went well. She eventually healed and has continued to be in remission. In retrospect, Hayley characterized the encounter as a turning point rather than merely a health struggle. She felt for the first time that she was choosing her own path instead of following music's dictates. She began to associate recovery with food, exercise, spirituality, music, and being honest with herself and other people. Later, as she thought back on the illness, she linked it to a more general pattern in her life. Decades of being what was needed, decades of adjusting, and decades of satisfying others. She had to cease bargaining with that version of herself because of the cancer. It required being there. She had already experienced numerous silent upheavals at that time. Uneven relationships, job dislocation, early fame, financial loss, and being a single parent. She was not publicly defined by any of those moments. They molded her together in private. She decided to narrate the tale herself in 2021. In order to fill in the gaps in the picture, Forever Young was penned. She was able to make connections between visibility and loneliness, discipline and music, quiet and success and cost thanks to the book. Hayley Mills no longer lives at the same speed that once characterized her. She continues to be creatively engaged, especially in theater and writing, but she is not under any pressure or sense of urgency. Her life now revolves around her family. She has characterized her involvement as a grandmother to 5 grandkids as both very intimate and grounding. Her days are more subdued and purposeful. She doesn't work because she has to, she works because she wants to. Her worth is no longer determined by the industry. Additionally, maintaining the public image is no longer necessary. Hayley Mills lived two lives simultaneously for 30 years. The one she carried by herself and the one that others saw. It was survival, not deceit, that established the music gap between them. Those two lives don't have to remain apart now that the story has been conveyed in her own words. Do you believe that Hayley Mills was shielded from the negative effects of celebrity? Post your responses in the space provided for comments below. Remember to like, this video, subscribe to our channel for future updates, and click on the next video on your screen if you, liked it.